Faces on paper, curled at the edges, names said once and swallowed by time. Rooms went quiet, streets moved on. Something about this never died. Cold hands on cold files, dust where the truth should be. Every lie leaves a footprint, every monster bleeds eventually. For the missing that never came home, for the cases they tried to forget, for the killers counting days in the dark, thinking they're done with that. We keep digging, keep the light on.
All right. Good evening. My name is 12 Gauge, and this is my channel, 12 Gauge Investigative. Sorry about starting up a little late. You know, I had some internet issues, and then I had forgotten that I took my StreamYard off. I was changing some things on it, and I had to reestablish it. So it took some time, and regardless, here I am. I hope everybody who generally come to the channel enjoys what I'm about to present tonight. We're going to talk about antisocial behavior and how it affects many parts of our lives. And does it indeed create serial killers? You know, in true crime, the question is rarely what happened. It's what someone became long before anyone noticed. Let me say that again. It's what somebody had become long before anyone noticed. Antisocial behavior isn't always loud. It doesn't always announce itself with violence or chaos. More often, it shows up quietly. It shows up in the form of withdrawal, emotional detachment, disregard for social norms, a growing separation from empathy and accountability. And that's one of the things that we hear about a lot in most of the cases that we cover that have to do with individuals that hurt others, that they have lack of empathy. You know, they also have a growing separation from empathy and accountability, like I just said. In most cases, we cover these behaviors aren't isolated incidents. They're patterns, which I always talk about patterns. Patterns that harden over time. Isolation turns into resentment. Detachment becomes justification. And eventually, these traits can be maladaptive personality structures. Ways of thinking that normalize people being harmed, rationalize control, or dehumanizing of others. This is where true crime often begins. It doesn't begin at the crime scene, but years earlier, in the mindset of missed warning signs, the rationalization, the belief that the rules don't apply to them, or that other people are merely obstacles. You know, tonight we're going to examine how prolonged antisocial behavior can evolve into maladaptive personalities, and how, in some cases, these traits appear again and again across violent offenders, serial criminals, and individuals who leave devastation in their path. So I hope that you enjoy the presentation. Hello, how are you doing in the chat? Thank you for being here. I appreciate you coming and spending some time with me. I'm going to play a video and then we're going to go with what I have ready for tonight. You know, when it comes to this antisocial behavior or antisocial maladaptive thinking patterns that people have, they often ask themselves, does this have anything to do with anything? Well, if you really understand the topic of what I'm talking about, it has everything to do with everything, you know, because antisocial doesn't just mean that you're a person that doesn't like to hang around people. It has a deeper meaning. It has a maladaptive formality on how you deal with life and the people in it. And eventually, like it says, you know, you form a mentality where you have disregards towards others. And this is an example, one of the examples of many that I have that I'm going to show you. And this has to do with the understanding. As you can see in the video, that is Jeffrey Dahmer. And this channel is called Grunge. So if you go and give this channel a like, subscribe, I think this is well done. So let's go ahead and start with the video.
And podcasts on the market, it's safe to say that true crime has become an obsession for many. Serial killers especially have attracted the attention of the morbidly curious. Here's a look at the traits most serial killers have in common. Most serial killers suffer from some kind of personality disorder, usually psychopathy or antisocial personality. The difference between these two disorders is simply nature versus nurture. For example, a psychopath's brain has underdeveloped impulse control and emotional centers from birth. By contrast, antisocial personalities are learned and usually develop during an abusive or neglected childhood.
So let's stop right there. Think about this a minute. If a lot of these things that we see in true crime are just that, they're personality disorders. And people want you to believe that, you know, when you hear the word psychopath or when you hear the word sociopath or somebody that's antisocial, just like it showed in that video form very, very shortly, they want you to believe that it's about a crazy person. It's about a person who is going to be different than everybody else. Well, of course, they're going to be a little different because their personality disorder, when it comes to that, it is a learned behavior from society in which that causes the personality disorder. And some of the killers that we have touched on this channel, Israel Keys, Richard Ramirez, you know, the list goes on and on. Oh, Dahmer. Think about that a minute. Was Dahmer a sociopath or was he a psychopath? Based on the definition of what you just heard, do you believe that his personality was fed through society, or do you believe that he was born that way? Go ahead and leave your answer in the comments or in the chat if you're in the chat. Tell me what you believe about Dahmer.
However, neither of these disorders equals insanity, which is why the not guilty by reason of insanity defense rarely works for a serial killer. Killers deemed criminally insane are not mentally able to discern right from wrong. Serial killers, however, know very well how evil their actions are. They just don't care. In his book, Real Life Monsters, criminal investigator Stephen J. Gianangelo calls the calm, purposeful behavior of a serial killer predatory aggression, comparing it to the...
Think about that, predatory aggression. If you've seen those series that just flashed across the screen, The first one with the gentleman with the hat kind of pulled down, that was you. He was a serial killer. Dexter, serial killer. I believe that, if you have watched the Dexter series, you understand that the series talks about Dexter being born in blood, having to live by the code, having to to amend the wrongs of others. It is that mentality that you're doing the right thing, even if it's killing. But these are just theories, okay? So let's talk about real life. And let's see what the chat is saying. Melissa says he was a nibbler and he was born that way. And we're talking about Jeffrey Dahmer. Hey, Walt Harris. And then she goes on to say, well, maybe not caring is not the total picture. Well, of course. Because, if your personality is that of an antisocial person, many people believe that, oh, I'm antisocial because I don't like to be around people. I'm antisocial because I like to stay home all the time, or I don't like to be around society. I'm very introverted. I'm very distant. That's not what antisocial is. If you break down the word, anti means without, and social is obviously societal. So if you do break down the word, it is in essence a definition, but it doesn't define what we're talking about here, because we're talking about individuals where society has formed a distance between them, their thoughts, and their actions. So let's continue on. I hope this is making sense. If it's making sense, put a number 1 in the chat or put a number 1 in the comments whenever you're watching this later on replay. Let me read one more comment and then we'll continue on. It says, I will elaborate. If you're born like that, well, then it's more to the point that they may not be able to ever understand why they see things very differently. People who are different, they know it as a kid. And that's very insightful. That's very insightful. I believe that they do know that they're different. I believe just like these movies that we see or these series such as Dexter, especially Dexter. If you haven't watched Dexter, the Dexter series, it is something to watch because it defines a lot of personality traits that do lead to a sociopathic outcome. But also, they believe that sociopaths are able to be rehabilitated. Psychopath, not so much. Not so much. So let's continue on.
The aggressive behavior of carnivores. Predatory animals kill simply to satisfy a need. There isn't any rage behind the action. In other words, while other killers may kill because they are provoked, a serial killer kills because he truly believes he needs to. A person who has a predatory, aggressive personality believes other people are inferior, which makes it easy for him to justify hurting or preying on others. Serial killers don't have normal human empathy, but they're very good at pretending like they do. Therefore, it's up to the rest of us to learn how to recognize fake empathy when we see it. Simply put,
so think about what he just said right there. They have fake empathy. They try to be the individual that blends in with society. They may or may not have an event in their lives where they were the hero. Something happened. A kid was drowning. They jumped in. They saved the kid, and everybody was chanting their name. But that's not what was fueling their desire. Their desire is to plan their attack. It's not about notoriety. It's about the urge to kill, the fantasy to kill. And I've talked about that a lot of times in my prior videos. that are in my library. So if you want to go into the library and check those out later on, I hope you do, because there's a lot of information about this. And if you really break down the mentality of what triggers these individuals to be who they became, or whether they were born that way with a maladaptive mindset, the inability to be adaptive in society and the norms that we all cherish, such as life, liberty, and the freedom to pursue our goals. Well, the serial killer or the killer desires the same thing, but there's only one small difference. They have an urge that many people do not act on. And for a lot, that is to hurt people, and oftentimes it's to kill people. And they justify it with a fake empathy. I did it all for the better good of humanity.
If your instincts tell you someone is just going through the motions when it comes to exhibiting empathy, love, or concern, your instincts are probably correct. Listen to your gut. It's better to be safe than sorry. Most of us live our lives believing that the person sitting next to us couldn't possibly be a serial killer. That kind of stuff only happens in movies or to other people. We think we'd know if one of our loved ones was actually an undercover monster. However, the terrifying truth is that serial killers are incredibly skilled at twisting perception and controlling those around them like marionettes. They prey on the insecurities of those closest to them and masterfully manipulate loved ones to never suspect them of any wrongdoing.
There's a master manipulator right there, BTK. If you've ever followed that case, BTK is a very interesting case to follow. I've done a little bit of work on BTK in some of my videos in the past. And you know, when I deep dove into his mental psyche, it was hard to believe that an individual such as this, an individual who was very well thought of in the community, one that blended in, one that everybody valued, that this individual was only using that as a cover. It wasn't really who he was. This was the mask that many people in his walk of life, they create so that people do not really know who they are. We're talking about the psychopaths right now, not the sociopath. The sociopath is an individual who, through trauma or some kind of issue in their lives, is formed into a very rigid individual who preys on breaking the law, doing what they need to go against the societal norms. Many of us, part of our societal norms are getting up and going to work, being a good role model for others, being very passionate about what we do in life, whether it be our job, whether it be our families, whether it be being a good person. Those are societal norms. But unfortunately, these individuals only use those societal norms in order to blend in enough to be preying and hunting on their victims. If you haven't deep dove into the BTK case, I suggest that you do so. It's very interesting.
That's why the families and friends of serial killers are always shocked to discover the person they thought they knew as evil incarnate.
Just can't be. I keep shaking my head saying, how can this be? Because he had lots of friends, very good student in school, a very normal, active boy.
According to Psychology Today, Jeffrey Dahmer's father simply accepted his son's lies at face value because it was easier for him to believe the lies than to admit to himself that his son was a monster. But even those of us who aren't already emotionally invested in a relationship with a dangerous person can be manipulated. Generally speaking, if someone appears to try and bribe you or distract you from flaws in a story using flattery, flowers, or gifts, you should definitely keep your guard up.
I mean, can you imagine being in a relationship with Ted Bundy? He had women at his disposal that were actively in relationships with him, that trusted him, as some of these others. You know, Israel Keys. Israel had a wife and a child and a career. He was in the military. While, unbeknownst to other people, right after a family vacation, he would be traveling all over the country hiding kill kits. And they're returning to those kill kits and doing what the urge and the fantasy in his head were unable to escape. It's the calling, the Jumanji drum, as I like to call it. If you've ever watched Jumanji, you understand that the drum beat that drives people. You know, in that movie, they knew the situation was about to change when they heard the drum. So think about that. If that beat is beating in your head and beating in your chest, and you're trying to formulate a normal life while behind the scenes you're sneaking off and killing people across the country, as Israel Keys was, to return back into your normal life as if nothing was wrong. Think about that a minute. Many people say or believe, let's say belief, because their beliefs are what drives their opinions. Many people believe that certain people weren't capable of being this monster. They're incapable of doing this or doing that. What's that belief system right there that makes them the most dangerous? Because it's not what we see in a person that we often understand in the long term. It's who they ultimately become once we know that hidden part of their Johari window comes to light. There's 4 phases in Johari's window. So if you don't know about Johari's window, that is what I'm talking about. And most of the time we have 4 window panes that we live life and see life through. So what I'm talking about right now is what we don't show the world. There's a lot of people that try to be quote unquote normal, and behind the scenes you find out, man, they were really addicted to gambling, or they were addicted to, you know, I don't know, pornography or anything like that. Because you always hear it. I could not believe that this person actually was this type of individual. Have you ever said that about somebody? Once you find out that they're accused of something and they're found guilty of it, you're like, oh my God, I could never believe that this person would have became this. You get what I'm saying? Well, you know, there's a case right now where people are dissecting every minute detail, whether they're trying to find justice or whether they're trying to find the answers for themselves truly. I believe that if we really knew more about this individual's past, which this video was talking about, and what I'm going to talk about here in a minute in the slide that I made, we would really have a more understanding of who this person was or is. Because as this talked about patterns, the patterns in this person's life were consistent. But people want to say that those weren't important. But when you're doing a psychological workup on somebody, it's all about patterns. It is all about patterns. And I know you know who I'm talking about. I'm talking about Brian Koberger at the moment.
Abuse during childhood is not a direct path to serial killerdom, but many serial killers were abused as children. A Radford University study looked at the childhood experiences of 50 serial killers and discovered that 68% of them had experienced some type of maltreatment, either physical, sexual, psychological, or neglect. An earlier study even reported that 100% of serial killers studied had suffered some kind of abuse in childhood. David Hosier of Childhood Trauma Recovery says psychological abuse in particular has a strong correlation with future behavior. Children who are shamed, humiliated, or punished disproportionately can develop a propensity for cruelty as a direct result of that abuse.
See, we've heard that Mr. Koberger was bullied, right? But we also heard about Israel Keys. He was not bullied. He was an individual that grew up in a big family. He was abused by his parents. He was abused by his parents, not physically. He was abused religiously. And I believe that that religious abuse, because they were strict religious people. So Israel never felt that he was good enough in the eyes of God. So therefore, instead of trying to conform, because he always felt that urge and that fantasy to be different, because he knew he was different. And this became the relative path that set him on his way. Now, the other person I just discussed, he's discussed enough. I really don't want to make this live about him, because there's plenty of other people. If you really look at the antisocial behaviors of many people, including these that I'm talking about, you will relate and understand that these people really were troubled from a very young age.
Neglect is also a huge factor, as when children don't experience empathy from a parent or caregiver, they sometimes don't develop the ability to empathize with others. People who feel their own lives are out of control will sometimes look for smaller, more manageable situations to attain complete control over. If the person lacks empathy, that need for complete control may involve other human beings. Childhood abuse isn't the only factor in a person's past that can lead him to develop that oversized need for control. Kids who come from unstable homes, move frequently, or bounce around between foster homes may feel like they have no control over their lives, and therefore no time to develop real relationships with their peers. Not only do these children develop control issues, they also grow up with deficiencies in empathy. Combine this lack of empathy with a pathological need to control others, and you've got yourself a deadly combination. Serial killers almost always lack remorse. That's not really surprising, since the ability to repeat a brutal crime sort of depends on not feeling too bad about the first brutal crime you committed. However, a lack of remorse isn't necessarily specific to psychopaths and sociopaths. People who have fairly ordinary psychological makeups can also kill without remorse, provided they can successfully compartmentalize and dehumanize the people they kill.
It rubs the lotion on its skin, or else it gets the hose again.
But most of the time, lack of remorse is directly related to a killer's lack of empathy. If you're unable to empathize with someone who is afraid or in pain, you probably aren't going to feel much remorse about ending a person's life.
Well, let me clarify that just as clear as I can, as simple as I can. If you lack empathy for someone, you can visually see this person hurting, and your desire is not about their pain, but about your needs, about your wants. You know, it's a narcissistic mentality. We call that the dark triad, which is some other videos that I've done on my page. You know, I've been doing this for a while now, and I do have a lot of information in those videos in my library. And if you haven't watched them, you might go check them out, because there are a lot of correlations that leads individuals to the understanding of exactly what my belief is of true crime. My belief of true crime is not about sitting around and justifying behaviors for people or trying to find glitches in the investigation that led to their demise. Can you imagine what kind of society we'd be if we really allowed this behavior to be part of our investigative process, where we allowed, instead of trying to piece together a crime, we had to have every piece of the puzzle in order to try that person and to convict them by a jury of their peers? How difficult that would be. Because in order to have every piece of the crime, you'd have to be right alongside the individual committing the crime. Because there are some individuals that are very crafty when it comes to hiding the demise of other people, places, and things. Not every person who commits a crime is sloppy. Not every person who commits a crime leads a blood trail all the way to their home. Not every person that commits a crime is going to be easily found out with all the evidence in the world to show their 100% guilt. It doesn't happen like that in real life. It only happens that way in the movies sometimes. And most of the time, the only other place that it really happens is on YouTube, where many people are asking that one question that has no perfect answer. We can ask those questions. There's nothing wrong with that. But to ask yourself, is there ever a perfect investigation, a perfect trial, or even a perfect outcome? Because you've heard of individuals that should have gone to prison and possibly faced the death penalty that were acquitted. And I always bring up Casey Anthony in that regard, because Casey Anthony was guilty in my eyes. I don't know how you feel about that case, but in my eyes, I believe that she was guilty, not because of anything other than the evidence formed against her, but for whatever reason, her attorney was able to do their job enough to cause reasonable doubt. And therefore, she was acquitted. I don't know how you feel about that case, but you can let me know how you feel about the Casey Anthony case. Do you believe that she was guilty?
According to Psychology Today, the most common type of serial killer is the power control process-focused killer. John Wayne Gacy, Ted Bundy, and the BTK killer Dennis Rader all fall into this category. Power killers can be said to have a sort of God complex. They kill slowly because the ability to decide how and when their victims will die makes them feel empowered. Most killers who sexually assault their victims aren't motivated by lust. They're motivated by the feeling of power they get from the act. One of the FBI's favorite techniques for interviewing serial killers is flattery. Psychopathic killers in particular tend to have a grandiose sense of their own self-worth, so investigators can use praise to get them talking. According to behavioral analysts, psychopathic serial killers don't respond to altruistic interview themes, meaning that trying to make them experience guilt or sympathy for their victims is a waste of time. Instead, interviewers might praise them for their intelligence or for their skill at outwitting investigators. Forensic psychologist Stephen A. Diamond calls this quality psychopathic narcissism and likens it to an immature, selfish, self-centered, resentful, and raging child inside a...
Well, think about that aspect. You know, the psychopathic, immature mindset. How many people have we researched and found this in? Oh, that person is great. John Wayne Gacy. Let's take him as an example. They brought him up. Let's take him for an example. He was a very looked up individual in his community. He was into politics. He was rubbing shoulders with the elite. He had his own business. He was using the disguise of the clown makeup and the clown suit as the ability to get the focus off the fact that he was a killer. He would lure these young boys into his business on the pretense that he was helping them by giving them opportunity that they otherwise would not have, and then objectifying them to abuse, most of the time sexual, and then murdering them and keeping trophies. While at the same time dressing up, going and entertaining younger children, with society being none the wiser. So the fact that we try to pigeonhole a lot of our thought process when it comes to this aspect of psychopathic or sociopathic individuals, we want to say, well, there was no way that that person could have done this crime because their physical attributes, their mental capacity to overcome this or that, their ability to achieve in life. So think about what I'm saying right now. All that doesn't matter. It is nothing more than a guise to keep people away from who they really are. And I've always talked about that as being the representative and the real person. The representative is the person that wears the mask, the kind, gentle, caring, wanting to help. While the person underneath that mask is very manipulative, very focused on their own need, their own want, their own desires, their own fantasies. Does the killer always have to be a stalker? No. Do they always have to have a prey list or anything like that? No, of course not. Because we hear of individuals such as the case of the 18-year-old who went into Target to shop for a graduation gift for her boyfriend, was followed in by an individual who was lustfully looking at her legs, followed her around the store, followed her to her car, abducted her, sexually assaulted her, and killed her, stuffed her in her own trunk, drove the car back, and was caught on surveillance during the whole encounter with this individual. And think of that case if we were watching that case in 2020, in the year 2000, okay, and beyond. There was cameras obviously that captured this, but think about how people's outrage would be toward that case. Would they be defending the victim or would they be defending the killer? There was no way that it could have been this person due to the fact you don't see the crime happen. Okay? That is the defense strategy, to cause doubt on the investigation, to cause doubt on the people recollecting the memories of what they saw, what they heard. It's to cause doubt once the trial starts. But you do see the individual in this camera footage. You see them follow the person in, follow them around the store, and ultimately walk out after the person, and you see the person follow them to their car, and only the car drives away. So in rational thinking, would you believe that this person was the killer? I mean, ask yourself honestly. If you're not doing it for any other bias, based on that scenario that I just gave you, and this is an actual case, do you believe that the person was the killer? Yes. But in all actuality, if you're not looking for the killer, You're going to make up all the scenarios in the world what would make it not be that person, because that's your bias. That's your mindset. And in that lack of objectivity, you're not looking for justice. You're looking for excuses for your own narrative, your own output. Because if you were looking for justice for the 18-year-old that got killed, you'd be trying to find the person who did that. So one man in, one man out. She had no more interaction with anybody else, and she was killed. The interaction she didn't even really have with this person because he followed her around the store. So in theory, one man in, one man out. Pretty cut and dry, but you would think so. But in 2025, for whatever reason, people have to have more.
Powerful adult body. Children are inherently narcissistic and must be taught the rules of social behavior. But when children grow up physically but remain in a state of immaturity, they can become extremely dangerous people. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite topics are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.
Very well done. Yes, y'all do make sure to go check out the Grunge channel. They have some very interesting videos on there, and it's very insightful and informative. So go check them out. As what we were just watching, it was very insightful. Now I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint that kind of explains this a little deeper, a little simpler, and I'm going to give you not Richard Ramirez, but Israel Keyes aspect of this. So this starts out. Let's see if I can. Hold on, I can't do it like this because I have to be able to control this. Okay, it starts out. What we'll cover is the definition, which we were doing a while ago. The prevalence, the effects, the causes, the treatment, the myth, and the ultimate help. So this is a slideshow made into video form. So I guess I'm going to take it down on this ass because it's going too slow. Let me go ahead and pull it up in a different way. I hope you are enjoying this because it takes a little bit of time to be able to do all these things for you guys. And most people don't really understand the time that it does take to make these videos. The time to research it. I mean, honestly, I know about this because of my background, but because, if you didn't have that, think of how difficult this would be for you to have to present something that you really don't know about. I'm trying to see how to do this. Here we go. I haven't been on StreamYard in a minute, so it's kind of difficult to maneuver. There's a lot of different things that are different. Okay, like I said, we're going to learn about the informational video. It's not necessarily a medical type video, or it's not diagnosing anybody. So here we go. And I'm going to pause it to be able to go and discuss this further. As you can tell in this diagram, it starts with the family history. It says the genetic predisposition of having relatives with personality disorders increases the risk. So if you have individuals in your family that automatically have personality disorders or they have mental health issues, then you're pretty much on that path to potentially be just like your relatives, unfortunately. Um, the next one says conduct disorder. Children with a history of behavior violating societal norms are more likely to develop such disorders in adulthood. So, um, this is conduct disorders would be deviant disorder, DID, things like that. So, a lot of the individuals that I work with have that kind of disorder that they're given as juveniles because of their lack of societal foundation in their lives, whether it be family or whether it be them themselves that have mental health issues. And thank you for that, Walt. Um, the next one says exposure to violence. So if you're experiencing domestic or community violence during childhood, this raises the likelihood of developing ASPD, which is also antisocial personality disorder. So a lot of juveniles that I've encountered as well as adults that I've worked with, they do have that exposure to violence because there's a lot of trauma, whether it be either self-inflicted or witnessed during their upbringing. And there's a lot of individuals that are not raised in quote unquote healthy households. Substance abuse, a history of substance misuse correlates with higher rates of antisocial behavior. So you bring in the substances, then it just mixes in with the problem. The childhood trauma, it says abuse, neglect, or inconsistency in the parenting during childhood significantly contribute to the risk. So any kind of childhood trauma, let's say that you're neglected by your parent, you're having a strict parent that where you have that belief where you have no control over your life, that it's being controlled by somebody else. So as what we saw a while ago, it kind of stunts the growth in an individual where their whole output is to have control over others because they feel so much lack of control in their own lives. So think about some of the individuals that we've studied in our videos, such as Ramirez, Israel Keys, BTK, Gacy, or even Dahmer. Socioeconomic factors, growing up in an impoverished or high crime area fosters environments that increase antisocial tendencies. So when you hear somebody talking about growing up in the ghetto or growing up without, many people say, well, there's a lot of people that were raised in those same environments that didn't turn out to be criminals, that didn't turn out to be killers. And this is true. But they also probably had somebody in their lives that was guiding them, that was giving them love, that was giving them support, you know. So that is the socioeconomic factors. So let's move on to the next one. So think about this a little bit on some of the individuals that you yourself have studied based on their patterns of childhood. I mean, once again, we talk about Kohberger because he is the hot topic right now. But really, do we know a lot about his childhood other than the bullying factor? The comments, the things that people claim that he said or did. How was his home life? That's what I want to know. How was his home life? So these are some of the risk factors of antisocial personality disorder. There's the biological factors, like we said, there's the neurobiological factors, there's the psychological and behavioral factors, social and cultural factors, substance use and abuse, personality and temperament. There's the childhood behavioral issues. One thing that I've never heard somebody touch on is in that one case, in the Idaho case regarding Kohberger. What was his childhood behavior like? Was he isolated? We know that supposedly he was bullied, but was he really isolated? We've had people say that quote unquote knew him through interviews by newscasts and stuff like that. That Brian was a very kind and shy, introverted person, but that could be anybody throughout the development of life. I mean, most people, as they grow into their adult self, most people are shy and very self-conscious of who they are, you know. So some of these risk factors early on in life, if you experience these things, it really makes you a candidate for ASPD. So let's move on, because I don't want to really talk about a lot of these because they were just defined for you in that video. Now I apologize for the speed of this. Like I said, I'm still trying to remember how to do all this. Here are some of the clinical aspects of antisocial personality disorder. They expect others' admiration. They have a sense of entitlement. Their attention-seeking behaviors. They're concerned with one's own comfort, desires, and needs, but not those of others. So think about this individual. If we're creating a person right now, and we're basing their life on patterns that we notice. That's why psychological evaluations are so important when it comes to an individual. Once they break the law, psychological evaluations are necessary for us to understand what type of person this is. The second one says indifferent. They're deceptive. They're manipulative. They're exploitive. They're mean and physically aggressive. They're callous. They're ruthless. So if we're looking at this through the lens of an individual, we don't look at this as a checkoff list. So think about when you're looking at some of these other people that I just discussed, you're not going to be checking off. Were they indifferent people? Were they deceptive? Were they manipulative? Oh my God, that makes them a killer. No, that's not what this is talking about. This is a consistent pattern of behavior that has been going on in their lives for a very long time. So the fact that people want to use certain aspects of the physiological traits of an individual base it on a checkoff list is very biased, and it's very unfair to the person in what they're talking about. Because I want you to understand that pattern word. If you notice these patterns in somebody from a young age, and they're still exhibiting these patterns as an adult, then this is who they are. Some people start using substances at a young age. They have the addictive behavior, the criminal behavior, the generalized anxiety disorder, major depression, mania, or even schizophrenia. And we've heard that Richard Ramirez had the depression. He had the mania. As far as Israel Keys, the mental component that I believe he had was the addictive behavior and the substance use. But the criminal behavior, obviously, the same thing with Ramirez. But if you look back on their lives, which I've done videos that kind of outline their lives from birth to all the way to death, you will understand the pattern that you see, that people saw in these people all through their lives. And hopefully one day we know more about Brian Kohberger's past. I would love to understand the pattern, the rituals. You know, people talk about OCD. They talk about his cleaning, wanting to be a clean person. That's why he supposedly scrubbed down the Elantra when he got back to Pennsylvania. But at the same time, think about this. We saw how nasty that Elantra looked when he was pulled over in Indiana. A person who really had that obsessive compulsive personality would have stopped to wash that car. It would not have been as filthy as what we saw it on body cam. And you can say that I'm being foolish or I'm being judgmental, which I'm not. Because if you really have an understanding of what I'm talking about, of the physicality or the mentality of a person with obsessive compulsive disorder, they're unable to have a functioning ability in their life. They do function, but they have some sort of compulsion that creates a very maladaptive trait in their lives that many of these individuals despise. So here's some clinical aspects, so let's move on. I made this today. I was shocked because I'm going to show it in some of my classes. And this is based on the DSM-5 TR criteria. So how community and mental health can support? Because we always hear about the problem, right? Very seldom do we hear about support. Because there are individuals that watch these videos that suffer with some of the stuff that we talk about. And nobody really gives them community support. There's the accessibility factor, making mental health services acceptable to those in need. You know, if you don't have the ability financially to pay for mental health services, there is a nationwide number that you can dial to get services in your state, generally for free. Now, when I say free, you do have to have that understanding that since something doesn't cost, there's going to be a very long line for you to wait in order to get the help that you need. So try to catch this as soon as you can before it becomes a full-blown mental emergency. Try to look for support. Try to look for counseling, therapy, and support group tailored to your needs. There are plenty of support groups for depression, anxiety, OCD. There's a support group for just about anything these days, whether it's online or whether it's in your community. I mean, obviously, if you have antisocial traits and your goal is to become sociable, you're going to look towards something that you can attend within your community. That only makes sense. You're wanting to break through those barriers that you've created for yourself throughout time based on your nature versus nurture. The prevention, focusing, like I just said, on early intervention and preventing mental health issues before they escalate. That is the most important. If you understand what's going on with you, it's easier to catch it and do something about it in the early stages rather than when it becomes a full-blown emergency. Because what you're going to encounter is when you need help and these agencies blow you off or they tell you, we don't have the ability to get you in right now and you got to be on a waiting list or all this and that and the other, it's going to be like a kick in the face. Like, oh, I can't get any help anywhere. Nobody wants to help me. I'm in a mental crisis. But you're not understanding that many times people catch this before it becomes too tragic in their lives. Integration says collaborating with local resources and organizations to create a supportive network. So let's move on with this. If you want to revisit this, you can rewind this and kind of look at this. ASPD is a very long, drawn out explanation, and I'm trying to condense it into a modality where people can understand it. And it's hard to believe that people that are as outgoing as this individual at this table full of women could potentially be a rapist, a killer, a stalker. Stephen McDaniel was a law student, and he was stalking and eventually killed his next door neighbor, who was one of his classmates. He was stalking her. Nobody knew it. Oh, she didn't even know it until it was too late. So it's always good to get treatment and support. If somebody is telling you, hey, we're noticing this about you, we're noticing that about you, we're noticing that you might need some help. Not all violent can be helped. Diagnosis broader than criminality. So that's a myth or a fact. Not all violent people can be helped. The diagnosis is broader than the criminality. So which came first, the mental aspect or the crime? So a mentally ill individual or a person with antisocial personality, which is a personality disorder, if they commit a crime, were they a criminal first, or were they an individual driven by their mental incapacity to have empathy, remorse, or these other antisocial personality traits? So it's always good to seek help and resources. And I hope that you understand what I just said, because it's imperative to understand that, to know what we're talking about. And this kind of video is not going to be popular. It's not going to be one of those videos that gets 50,000 views, because most of the time people don't want to be told about themselves. They don't want to be told that they're broken. They don't want to be told that their neighbor could potentially be a killer. And let me give you the Israel key. Hold on a second. That's not the one I wanted. They don't want to be told that they have the capacity to harm other people. Who wants to be told that? I don't know anybody that does. That's awful. But at the same time, sometimes you have to be honest with people. You really do. You have to be honest with them and tell them, hey, I believe that looking at the patterns in your life, that you're out there, bro. That you're getting out there. You're really venturing into the realm of being harmful to other people and harmful to yourself.
This video discusses public.
Okay, so I'm gonna do this video and then I'm gonna conclude it. This is discussing Israel Keys. Yeah, most people don't want anybody to know. You're right about that. People that have depression or anxiety or something like that, they don't want people to know that they're not just like everybody else. Why would you want that? But at the same time, if you have the culpability of hurting somebody, wouldn't you want to get help? I believe that you would, So let's talk about Israel Keys here for a second. Let me move this where you can see it. I hope you are enjoying this. I really do, because it took me some time to make this. And I finished it last night, late into the night. So let's talk about Israel Keys.
Publicly reported information about Israel Keys. It is for learning purposes only and does not provide any medical diagnosis.
So this is going to talk about the FBI summarized facts, antisocial personality traits versus clinical diagnosis, the behavior descriptions from interviews, the timeline and context, and the important notes and resources. So this is the actual case that I brought up to be able to give you some kind of understanding of what I'm talking about.
According to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Israel Keys admitted to multiple kidnappings and murders committed across the United States between 2001 and 2012. Investigators described his planning as meticulous, including burying so-called murder kits and
Let me rewind this a little bit. That way you can see it. It says confirmed admissions. According to the FBI, Israel Keys admitted to multiple kidnappings, which he did, and murders committed across the U.S. between 2001 and 2012. His victims were often chosen at random, but his methods were highly calculated. So, if somebody does become a killer, if they have that fantasy, that ability to not be able to stop themselves, so to speak, and they don't have remorse in their body, they don't have remorse in their mind, they don't have the ability to have empathy or the care, and they're looking to get their needs met, they're going to be highly meticulous and highly calculated. Their meticulous planning. Investigators describe his planning as meticulous. He buried murder kits, caches containing weapons, cash, and disposable supplies in various locations. New York, Alaska, years in advance to avoid detection during his travel. I know this is off key, but think about the Las Vegas sniper. He was very meticulous. He brought all those guns and ammunition into the hotel without being detected. And people were shocked after the fact. They said, how did he get all that in here without anybody seeing him? Well, he walked into the front lobby, up to his room. Not a person in the whole place had a clue what was going on. With Israel, his travel and evasion went on significant distances, often flying to one location or the other. And we often talk about repeated unlawful behavior in people, deceitfulness and lying, impulsivity and aggressiveness, like we've talked about, reckless disregard for safety, consistent irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. So if you're looking at this on a checkoff list, which many people are going to do, once again, their bias is going to actually tell you what they're looking at and how they're looking at it through what kind of eyes. Because if I'm biased toward wanting somebody to be innocent, you're not going to hear one iota from me about them potentially being culpable of the crime. You're going to hear everything and anything about how incapable they would be to be able to commit such a heinous act. Everybody and anybody would be the person involved in the crime. I would try to put shade up to tell you, well, it could be this person, but let's look over here, because we have to look at every stone underneath it, even if it's not relative. You know, one of the things that individuals focus on in one of the cases that many talk on is the DNA. Okay, I've read the documents, I've seen the documentaries, I've seen the, the clinical paperwork, and they focus on there were 2 other unidentified DNAs on the knife sheath. And I was talking to somebody about this earlier. Let me tell you right quick, okay? And you can believe this or you can't. It's up to you, whatever. There's 2 unidentified DNAs on the knife sheath. They were later identified to be male. So they did the STR profile on them, obviously, because that's how they found the other one. I believe that due to the activity of this home, with the multiple individuals that were in and out of the home, they focused on the most consistent people that were in that home. The people that were there more often than not. The people that were consistently there. Who would have been able to be consistently in that room? Those were the individuals that were swabbed. So the unknown DNA factor would have included not knowing where these 2 DNAs came from. And if you look into the DNA's ability to get on things, was it transfer? Was it touch? Was it in the blood? All that focuses on that aspect. So to say that just because those STR profiles were unknown, it means that there had to be 2 more perpetrators. Think about this a little bit. Were those DNA profiles found anywhere else in the home? Were they found in the other room where the other 2 were murdered? Were they found in the kitchen? Because they swabbed a lot of things. They collected blood samples, I'm sure. They ran multitudes of tests, and I know this because I read them on a live that I did. Of everything that was ran, everything that was swabbed. But if it's in one room and it's not in the other, how could that be evidence of people that were alongside the killer? Because if you have 2 extra people in the upstairs bedroom, but you don't have these 2 extra people anywhere else in the home, or even in the other bedroom, how can you statistically state that these 2 were involved in this murder? That's just a question for you. It's not a rebuttal toward anybody else's belief or anything else. It's common sense, actually. It's kind of like if you find blood in the upstairs bedroom and you don't find the same mixture in the bottom bedroom and any of the blood droplets on the victim, in the victim, how would that be possible? Then you would be able to say that there could have been potentially different weapons and different people. But since there was a consistency of the wounds, there was a consistency of the trauma, and they were certain of what type of knife committed this. It's almost common sense that you would not look elsewhere. I don't know if there's a picture on the bed or not. If there is, we haven't been prevalent to that information. But I don't want to make it about Kohberger. I just wanted to talk on that a minute because I hear that a lot lately. People are they circulate their beliefs in different type of variations. If something isn't working, then we're going to jump back on the DNA. If that doesn't work, then we're going to jump on Kopaka. Kopaka doesn't work, then we're going to go back to the Frat. Frat doesn't work, we're going back to the grub truck. If the grub truck doesn't work, we're going back to, Taylor Avenue. We're going to the traffic stop. We're going to the cops. We're going to all this other. It's almost a repetitive cycle of inconsistency, because in none of those places have you didn't find any blood at Linda Lane, supposedly. Otherwise, we would have known it. Heck, I don't even think there was a blood trail found back to his vehicle. They found footprints, but was there blood found anywhere on the way back to his vehicle? Was there any blood found on the concrete, on the asphalt? Was there any blood found in the soil sample that they may have taken? Because to get DNA out of blood, that's the only way that you can tell whose blood that is. You can't physically trace blood back to an individual based on the blood. And that is a scientific notion right there. So let's continue on with Israel Keys.
Investigators described his planning as meticulous, including burying so-called murder kits and traveling significant distances to avoid detection. Sources: FBI case overview and interviews released in 2013. When the general public talks about antisocial personality disorder, they often refer to patterns like repeated unlawful behavior, deceitfulness, impulsivity, aggressiveness, reckless disregard for safety, consistent irresponsibility, and lack of remorse. In clinical practice, only qualified professionals evaluate these patterns against DSM-5-TR criteria. In interviews released by the FBI, the case agent noted Keys had no remorse and enjoyed maintaining a double life, keeping his crimes hidden from people around him. These descriptions reflect behaviors that the public may associate with antisocial traits. However, this video does not and cannot diagnose ASPD. Only licensed clinicians can make that determination for proper assessment. For timeline context, Keys was arrested in Texas in March 2012 after the kidnapping and murder of Samantha Koenig in Alaska. He took his own life in jail in December 2012. The FBI continues to seek information about additional victims and release travel timelines to help the public and local agencies connect open cases. If you would like to learn more, consult official FBI materials and major news outlets. If you are looking for mental health information, use national health websites and speak with a qualified professional.
Okay. And there's the video on Israel Keys that I made earlier. They kind of gave some collaborating thought to what we've been talking about as far as the antisocial personality disorder, the psychopathy, and sociopathic attributes. One thing that I do want to talk about a little bit before I sign off is people's thought process. It's interesting, the different variations of it. And once again, it's based on our patterns of life. It's based on how we were brought up, what we ultimately became, the trauma in our lives, the belief systems. And not everybody's going to feel the same. Not everybody is certain that Brian is the killer. Not everybody was certain that Ramirez was a killer. Not everybody was certain that BTK could have done that or Gacy could have done that. But once again, if your belief of certainty has to be that you have every viable detail of the crime in order to get that peace of mind, you're never going to have it. There's very few cases that have that cut and dry evidence. Unless it's captured from beginning to end, such as the Ukrainian girl that gets stabbed on a train. You see her getting on the train, you see her sitting there, You see the act happening and you see the person leaving and talking. That ultimately was the start and the finish of that crime. So there you had every variable, camera angle, you heard the audio, you saw her in her distress, but yet nobody talks about that. You know why? Because all the pieces are there. It's easier to keep a situation going when you plant the seed of doubt. You know, if you're saying you're doing it for justice, you're doing it for the memory of the 4 in that one case, or you're doing it for the 6 in the Ramirez case, 10 in the Ramirez case. Ultimately, you would want Ramirez to fry, which didn't happen. He died of, health issues, which a lot of these killers end up doing. They end up dying of health issues. Very few of them do actually get executed. But think about that a little bit. If your whole basis on watching true crime on YouTube, and once again, I'm not talking about anybody or anything or any case other than what I'm saying. I want you to hear me out. If you're really looking to find out who really did certain crimes, hell, there's people that aren't certain that Richard Allen was the culprit in the Delphi case. And I believe there's people that believe that Stephen Stearns was not the culprit. And there's other side of the coin that says, well, how can you be so naive? How can you be so stupid and callous to the memory of the victim? Well, some people are contrarian by nature. And they hide it through the quest for justice, which is their prerogative. On my channel, there is no quest for justice, and that's what I've always said. My channel's not about quest for justice, other than the factual information that we have. Nothing more, nothing less. If it's not there, it's not there. Because when you're diving into something that's not there, there's so much that could go wrong in that retrospect. Because if you were doing this while an active investigation was going on, you could get a tampering with an open investigation if you were looking around the crime scene trying to find stuff that other people didn't catch. Obstruction of justice, But one thing we must remember also in some of these cases is some of the information and the evidence, photos and documents and everything that we receive have been around for a long time now at this point. It's not new information. It's not new at all. And I heard somebody discussing when a crime has occurred, how come the DA or even the court-appointed attorney are at the scene? Well, that in itself showed the very limited understanding of the criminal process. Because if they really knew the criminal process, you would know that the DA goes to every felonious crime scene involving murders, bank robberies, rape, arson, those heavy hitters. Because they're putting together a case whether to take these individuals into indicting them or possibly dropping the case because there's not enough evidence. So in a lot of these cases, if there wasn't enough evidence presented by the investigative team or the first on the scene, they get dropped because there's not enough evidence. So think about the preliminary aspects of any case. It's not about the individual who ultimately committed the crime. It's about the initial, do we have enough evidence once we do find a suspect? Do we have enough evidence to put this person at this crime scene? And also, they're looking around at the crime scene so they can have a visual imprint on the first interactions of the crime. I think it's a very interesting concept that they're there. And I was reading a book by Matt Murphy, and he was a DA in Orange County. He's since retired. But I was reading his book, and he was talking about the aspect of when he would arrive at the crime scene with the detectives and the forensic teams, and he would go looking around at the evidence. That way he could get the mental imprint on what he was seeing. So it's pretty procedure for that to happen. Pretty normal procedure. But once again, either you don't know or you want to misguide, one or the other. Or you just don't care what comes out your mouth. Because unlike other channels, mine's not about guilt or innocence. It's not about the truth. It's just about presenting information for the audience. It's not entertainment. My channel is always and will always be about presenting the base analysis on the crime that I talk about and the investigative process that goes along with it. And whether that's boring to you or whether you're drawn to it, I appreciate those that come to the channel and let me know that they're listening, that they're following, that they're supporting. Because that's what I started the channel for. Not for guilt, not for innocence, not to talk about everything that could have went wrong in the case or did go wrong in the case, or whether even they got the right person. Because the lens in which you see something can be easily seen in your life, your daily living. So in which you see the world is what you see is missing in your own life most of the time. Is it power? Is it control? Is it the feeling of being wronged throughout society, throughout your years of life? Or does it merely give you a sense of identity? Because that's what social media does for a lot of people. It gives them a sense of identity they don't have in their daily life. They don't have that in their real life. But thank you so much for being here tonight. And I hope that you enjoyed this. If you watched this on replay, and those of you that showed up in the chat, Melissa, thank you so much for being in here. Nice to see you again. And I'm going to end this with, like I always do, I'm going to end it with a song. This song is called The Sin. Maestro, cue that music. See you again soon.
Wake up
to a war before my feet hit the floor. Mind full of noise, heart tired of keeping score. Bills on the table, hope under the bed. I shake hands with fear, every word that I said. Life throwing punches I never could block. Clock keeps ticking, but I'm frozen in shock. Smiles in public, storms when I'm home. Surrounded by people, but dying alone. I carry my past like a loaded gun. Every regret says you're not the one. I try to run, but the shadows stick. Every road feels narrow, every choice feels quick. I've been fighting battles nobody sees. Depression digs trenches inside of me. Life don't play fair, it just loads the dice. Demons talk loud, whisper suicide. And the hardest fight I ever had is staring back at me in the mirror's glass. I argue with ghosts, I can't run. Hold versions of me saying look what you've done. Promises broken, dreams half built. Carry the weight, carry the guilt. Some days I'm strong, some days I fold. Some nights the dark feels 10 feet cold. I tell myself just make it through, but the voice in my head says what's the use? I learned how to bleed without showing scars. How to laugh while falling apart. I fake the light when the room feels dead. Say I'm fine with the war in my head. I've been fighting battles nobody sees. Depression digs trenches inside of me. Life don't play fair, it just loads the dice. Demons talk loud, whisper suicide. And the hardest fight I ever had is staring back at me in the mirror's glass. Mirror says change, I say I'm trying. It says prove it, I say I'm surviving. Some days winning just means I breathe. Some nights courage is staying with me. Still fighting battles nobody sees. But I'm learning pain don't get the keys. Life knocked me down, yeah, more than twice. But I'm still here, still paying the price. And if I fall standing tall. Cause I faced that mirror and didn't crawl. This ain't a victory song, it's a truth. A bruised up heart still chasing proof. If you're fighting too, you're not alone. We all go to war when we make it home.